You stand beneath a blazing Anatolian sun, dust clinging to your sandals, as a wall of men advances in perfect silence. Bronze spearheads glint like a moving horizon, and above them rise faces calm, unreadable, almost immortal. This is the living core of the Achaemenid Empire, the force that foreign observers would come to call the Immortals. Their story begins around 550 BCE, when Cyrus the Great forged Persia from scattered tribes into an empire, and ends nearly 2 centuries later, around 330 BCE, as Alexander's armies shattered Achaemenid power and dissolved its elite formations. Immortals were conceived not merely as soldiers, but as a political instrument. Numbering exactly 10,000 men, they formed the standing guard of the great king. When one man fell ill, was wounded, or died, another immediately took his place, keeping their number constant. To allies this suggested divine favor. To enemies it bred fear, as if the line could never thin. Herodotus recorded that this unchanging number gave rise to their legendary name, though the Persians themselves likely knew them simply as the Anoxia. The companions, their origins lay in the Median and Persian warrior traditions, but Cyrus refined them into a centralized, salaried force loyal to the crown rather than to clan or satrap. Recruited primarily from Persian nobility and closely allied Iranian elites, they represented both military strength and imperial unity. Service among the Immortals brought immense rewards: gold derricks, fine Babylonian textiles, land grants, and a place close to royal power. Faces in the ranks often bore expressions of quiet confidence, men who knew they stood above ordinary infantry, watched directly by the king. From the beginning, their role was dual. On campaign, they served as shock troops and disciplined heavy infantry. At court, they functioned as ceremonial guards, standing motionless behind the throne during audiences, their presence reinforcing the idea that the king ruled by order, not chaos. Cyrus himself, described by Xenophon as calm and persuasive rather than cruel, is said to have reminded his elite guard before campaigns that an empire is held not by numbers, but by obedience and resolve. Such statements framed the Immortals as moral exemplars as much as warriors. Their early successes cemented their fame. During the conquest of Lydia and Babylon, they advanced methodically, securing key positions while other units maneuvered. They did not rush. They endured. By the time Cyrus fell in battle in 530 BCE, the Immortals were already an institution, their discipline and permanence symbolizing the stability of the empire itself. Yet even in this early glory lay the seeds of rigidity, a perfection built to last forever, in a world that would not remain unchanged. As the line closes, details emerge that distinguish these men from any common levy. The Immortals' uniforms were as much statements of empire as practical equipment. They wore scale armor or quilted linen corselets, lighter than Greek bronze but flexible, often dyed in rich hues. Over their shoulders hung patterned cloaks, fastened with ornate brooches of gold or silver. On their heads sat soft felt caps or tiaras, practical for the eastern climate, framing faces that were often bearded, composed, and stern rather than ferocious. Their primary weapon was the spear, roughly 2 meters long, its butt capped with a counterweight shaped like a pomegranate gold for officers, silver for common ranks, an unmistakable symbol of fertility and royal authority. At their waists hung short swords or daggers, similar to the Achaemenid of Scythian origin, ideal for close combat. Many carried composite bows, laminated from wood, horn, and sinew, allowing them to rain arrows before closing ranks. This blend of ranged and melee capability reflected the vast cultural influences of the empire. From the steppes to Mesopotamia. Organization within the Immortals was meticulous. The 10,000 were divided into smaller units, likely thousands and hundreds, each commanded by officers drawn from noble families. Discipline was strict, but not brutal. Loyalty was cultivated through privilege. Training emphasized formation fighting, endurance, and obedience. They advanced behind large wicker shields when needed, forming a dense wall, but could also disperse into flexible ranks to support cavalry or secure terrain. Their movements were deliberate, rehearsed, almost ritualistic. Under Cambyses II, r. 530 to 522 BCE, this professionalism was tested in Egypt. Before the march on Memphis, Greek sources described tense councils where advisors warned of long supply lines and hostile deserts. Cambyses, often portrayed as volatile, is said to have stared coldly at his commanders, insisting that speed and discipline would break Egyptian resistance. The Immortals led the advance, their cohesion holding firm even as heat and distance wore down other units. Victory brought enormous spoils, temple treasures, silver, grain reserves, and further elevated their status. By the reign of Darius I from 522 BCE, the Immortals had become the backbone of imperial enforcement. Darius, methodical and pragmatic, relied on them to suppress revolts from Babylon to Media. In inscriptions, he emphasized order against the lie, a concept mirrored in the Immortals' precise ranks. Their faces in these campaigns were not joyous but resolute, men aware that each victory reinforced an empire stretching from the Indus to the Aegean. Yet the very uniformity that made them formidable also tied them to a system increasingly challenged by new forms of warfare beyond. Persia's heartlands. The empire expands like a tide, and at its crest marched the Immortals. Under Darius I, their role in Imperial Conquest reaches its height, as Persia transforms from a realm won by brilliance into one held by administration and force. From 520 BCE onward, revolts flare across the empire. Babylon, Media, and the eastern satrapies, and the Immortals are repeatedly dispatched as the king's unbreakable core. Their presence alone often decides battles before the first spear is thrown, for rebellion falters when confronted by troops who never seem diminished. Campaign, they advance in measured rhythm, shields overlapping, spear points steady. The Immortals rarely chase glory. Instead, they secure decisive ground city gates, river crossings, palace approaches, allowing other units to maneuver. At the reconquest of Babylon, Darius reportedly convened a council where generals argued for prolonged siege. His expression, carved in later reliefs, is calm but unyielding. He is said to have replied that order returns when the heart is struck, and the Immortals were sent forward in a coordinated assault that collapsed resistance within days. Their success rests on adaptability. Against lightly armed rebels, they fight as heavy infantry, pressing forward inexorably. Against fortified cities, they combine bowfire with shielded advance, allowing engineers to work. Unit cohesion remains their defining trait. Even when casualties occur, replacements flow in from reserve elites, preserving the sacred number of 10,000. Victories are rewarded lavishly. After the suppression of the Ionian revolt in the late 6th century BCE, Immortal officers receive estates in Asia Minor, along with fine Milesian textiles and silver tribute. Yet cracks begin to show as the empire meets organized resistance. Greek hoplites fight differently: heavier armor, denser formations, uncompromising frontal combat. Early encounters reveal that while the Immortals are disciplined and versatile, they are not invulnerable. Persian commanders note this uneasily. In councils before Western campaigns, some argue for greater reliance on cavalry and allies, while others insist the Immortals remain the empire's moral center. Their fame still endures, but it is now tested against enemies who do not break easily. By the early 5th century BCE, the Immortals are veterans of countless campaigns, their faces lined, eyes sharp with experience. They have built an empire through control rather than annihilation. But the West will demand a different kind of war, one where permanence is challenged by shock and mass. As Persia turns fully toward Greece, strategy becomes a matter of debate rather than certainty. In the courts of Darius I and later Xerxes I, councils grow tense, filled with maps, messengers, and conflicting advice. The Immortals stand nearby. During these deliberations, silent witnesses to imperial decision-making. Herodotus recounts that before renewed Western campaigns, older nobles warned of Greek stubbornness, while younger commanders scoffed at city-states daring to resist the cheering. Great King Darius, stern and calculating, famously declared that Athens would be punished, a vow repeated like ritual. His death in 486 BCE passes the burden to Xerxes, whose personality contrasts sharply tall, expressive, prone to flashes of anger and doubt. Before marching west in 480 BCE, Xerxes convenes a grand council. His uncle Artabanus urges caution, warning that numbers do not guarantee victory. Xerxes' face is described as flushed with emotion, as he insists that retreat would dishonor Persia. The Immortals, polished and unmoving, embody the certainty he seeks on the march into Greece. They serve as Xerxes' personal guard and elite reserve. Their equipment gleams, but their tactics remain cautious. At Thermopylae, while not the primary assault force, they are committed after repeated failures by other troops. When ordered forward, their expressions are disciplined but tense. This is not the open terrain they prefer. They maneuver through mountain paths, outflanking Greek defenders, contributing decisively to Persian victory there. Gold and praise follow, yet losses are heavier than expected. Despite successes, the campaigns reveal limits. Greek morale does not collapse. After Salamis, debates resume, sharper now, tinged with frustration. Xerxes' confidence wavers. Advisors argue over whether elite infantry can compensate for naval defeat. The Immortals remain loyal, but their role shifts increasingly toward protection and stabilization rather than conquest. Rewards still come silver, ceremonial honors, precedence at court, but the aura of inevitability fades by the end of Xerxes' reign in 465 BCE. The Immortals are still intact, still numbering 10,000, but the empire's strategic posture has changed. They are no longer symbols of unstoppable expansion, but guardians of a vast, strained dominion. Their discipline endures, yet the world around them has learned how to resist permanence. The long struggle with the Greek world reshapes the fate of the Immortals, not through a single defeat, but through erosion. After the great invasions of the early 5th century BCE, Persia no longer seeks total conquest of the Aegean. Instead, the Immortals are deployed in a more restrained role guarding satrapal capitals, escorting royal envoys, and reinforcing allied forces. Their origin as an aggressive spearhead gives way to a function of containment, a subtle but profound shift in purpose. In Western Asia Minor, they face hoplite mercenaries and increasingly professional Greek soldiers hired by rival Persian factions. These men fight with confidence born of experience, not fear. Councils before clashes grow pragmatic rather than grand. Persian commanders debate terrain, supply, and diplomacy as much as battle. The Immortals, still impeccably equipped with spears, bows, and scale armor, adapt tactically, using missile fire and defensive formations rather than frontal pressure. Victories bring smaller rewards, now stipends, maintenance of estates, ceremonial, gifts rather than vast plunder. Their decline is not immediate, nor is it dishonorable. Even into the 4th century BCE, under kings like Artaxerxes II, the Immortals remain a prestigious formation. They help suppress internal revolts and stand at the king's side during tense negotiations with Greek mercenary leaders. Faces once confident now show calculation, Caution, the awareness that the empire survives through balance rather than dominance. Yet rigidity persists. Recruitment remains narrow, innovation limited, traditions preserved even as warfare evolves. The final test comes with Alexander of Macedon. By 334 BCE, Persian armies still include elite guards modeled on the Immortals, but the original institution is fading. At battles like Issus and Gaugamela, Persian infantry fights bravely, but Macedonian combined arms tactics overwhelm them. The idea of an unbreakable, static elite collapses under relentless shock and maneuver. When Darius III flees, a symbolic heart of the guard shatters. By 330 BCE, with the fall of Persepolis, the Immortals as a distinct formation effectively cease to exist. Some survivors enter new service, others fade into history. There is no formal disbandment ceremony, only the quiet disappearance of a force once thought eternal. Their decline is not marked by shame, but by obsolescence in a transformed world of war. In the aftermath of Persia's collapse, the memory of the Immortals lingers long after their banners vanish. What began around 550 BCE as an elite guard, for a rising empire ends, nearly 2 centuries later, as a legend overshadowed by new forms of power. The Immortals did not fall because they lacked courage or discipline. They fell because permanence itself became their weakness. Their refusal or inability to fundamentally transform mirrored the fate of the empire they served. Ancient writers remember them with a mix of awe and misunderstanding. Greek historians emphasize their numbers and exotic appearance, sometimes downplaying their skill, yet even hostile accounts admit their discipline and endurance. Persian records, though fragmentary, frame them as embodiments of Asha order and truth. Their uniforms, weapons, and fixed organization become templates for later royal guards across Asia, from Hellenistic courts to Near Eastern dynasties. Their legacy is not defined by a single battle, but by continuity. For generations, the Immortals represented stability in a world of constant rebellion and expansion. They secured kingship, enforced law, and projected imperial presence from India to the Mediterranean. The rewards they earned: gold, land, honor bound them to the throne, while their fame outlived the political system that created them. In the end, the Immortals teach a paradox of military history, that an elite force can be both invincible in reputation and vulnerable in reality. Their story is one of discipline triumphing over chaos, and tradition eventually yielding to change. They were never truly immortal, but for 2 centuries, they convinced the world they might be. Conclusion and assessment of the situation and consequences, including gains and losses for both sides after the battle. The rise and fall of the Immortals reflects the broader arc of the Achaemenid Empire itself. In their victories, Persia gained unprecedented territorial control, immense wealth, and political stability across diverse regions. The Immortals secured these gains by enforcing royal authority and ensuring continuity at the heart of power. Their disciplined presence deterred rebellion and allowed Persian kings to rule through order rather than constant violence. Yet the losses were structural rather than immediate. Reliance on a fixed elite limited adaptation, while enemies learned to counter Persian methods with new tactics and formations. Greek resistance and later Macedonian innovation exposed the limits of an infantry force designed for permanence rather than flexibility. Persia lost not only battles, but the strategic initiative. For their opponents, survival and eventual victory came at great cost. Cities burned, populations displaced, but success reshaped the balance of power. The Immortals' legacy endures as a lesson in how military excellence must evolve or fade, reminding history that even the most disciplined forces are bound by the era that creates them.